So hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining me for Honeybee Frequently Asked Questions number 14 for beginning beekeepers. Today is Friday, April 26th. As you saw in the opening sequences there, the weather here is perfect. Everything's just awesome. Little rain, little flooding, temperatures descending instead of going up the way they're supposed to, but you know, we don't care. I showed you the beehives, all the bees are inside, nobody's flying, nobody got caught in the storm. Why? Because it's a slow cool down. And yesterday though, I did get out and I did get to do some things, but today, here we are inside, warm and snug, just like always, and not able to go out in what should be a sun-splashed Friday morning with dandelions beginning to open and things like that. If you're new here, welcome, and one of the ways that you can get your questions answered is to go ahead and write them down in the comment section below this video, and just write down what your question is, and we'll see if it might have broad interest, and I'll answer that next Friday. We release one of these every Friday or Saturday, hopefully. So, and for those who returned, thank you last month and last week. For those of you who gave me your questions that composed today's series. So if you want to know what's going to be discussed, look down in the video description, and each item that we're going to talk about is listed there. People have asked for me to put in the timeline on that and link each subject to the time that it starts in the video. I'm going to try to do that also to save you from looking at the whole thing, but it's better for me if you watch the whole video because it helps with my rankings. The length of time you spend watching a video is pretty helpful. So anyway, let's get right into it. Daniel Harden had the first question and says, what do you do to wash bee suits? Okay, well, a lot of people, myself included, are not great at washing our bee suits. I suspect a lot of you that are watching, if you've been keeping bees for any period of time, you probably haven't gotten around to washing your bee suit yet. I would say the bee suit that I have that gets the most dirty is the one I wear when I'm weed whacking. So that one gets, grass stains and things like that all over it. So what I did was, instead of just answer that question right off the top of my head, I decided to contact one of my favorite bee suit makers, and that is Guardian Bee Apparel, and Terry's the owner. This is a family-owned bee suit company. So if you're interested in a bee suit and you want a ventilated one that has a zipper in it so you can zip it open and drink water and things like that while you're doing your work out in the bee yard, it's a fantastic company. I highly recommend them. And, I use bee suits from all the primary bee suit manufacturers. Some of them send me things for free. And Guardian Bee Apparel, when it comes to a vented bee suit, they're at the top of the chart. So the other thing is, one of the reasons I wanted to ask them about it is, a normal bee suit is just generally fabric, and you can wash that the way you do anything else. They have elastics in them and things like that, but there's no special care really for a bee suit in general. But these vented suits, they have some plastics and rubber material inside of them, which create a space between the mesh so that bee stingers can't get into you. At the same time, they're providing protection while ventilating and keeping you nice and cool. So I figured that would be the most sensitive and high maintenance suit. So I wrote to them and asked them what the method is. And guess what? He wrote back right away. One of the benefits of dealing with a small company like that, you don't just get a response. I get a response from the owner. So here's what he said. Now, when it comes to the veil, usually your veil's not generally getting that dirty, so there probably isn't a lot to do with it unless you're perspiring a lot inside the veil and somehow getting the fabric dirty. But the veil, he says, should be unzipped from the suit and washed by hand, and then, of course, just air dried. And I'm going to talk about what to use to wash them with in a second also. And he said that you can wash the whole suit, jacket or pants. I have the full Guardian Bee Apparel suits, so it's a one-piece. You can remove the veils. In fact, they have a bunch of different veil designs that you can use on your suit too. So he says to take it off and use Tide-free. And that makes perfect sense. Here's the funny part. This is Tide-free, and free and gentle is the full thing. But here's what's interesting about that. Until he said that to me, I didn't own any of this. I emailed my wife right away, and I said, are you shopping? Would you please get this for me? And then when it came, it's obvious why that's the choice. Because if you're using any kind of fabric softener, any detergent that leaves a residue in the fabric and there's a scent associated with it, that's not going to be good when you're out in the bee yard. So there are a lot of advantages to using Tide Free and Gentle. I'm going to put a link also. This is available on Amazon. And dermatologist tested, free of dyes, and free of perfumes. So if you've got sensitive skin as well, you know, when you perspire and your skin is in direct contact with a lot of synthetics and materials, maybe you're the kind of person that gets a rash. So this would help avoid that as well, because you don't want that to be born of the chemicals used when you're washing your suit. So that was really cool. You put it in the gentle cycle and then you just air dry it. So for those of you who have been washing your suits and have had great results, if you use this stuff, I would appreciate seeing your comments down below. I'd like to know if it worked well for you and what kind of stains did you get out. It's interesting that years ago when I was kind of searching around to find out how to give a good bee presentation, when I was talking to elementary school kids and going to the Whole Foods Co-op and things like that, aside from getting little model beehives and things like that. I got this 10 years ago, I think, from Better Bee or Dunn. But they said to bring your bee suits that look worn, and if they're dirty, don't clean them, and so on. And I just thought, that's weird. You know, you want to bring dirty bee suits in to talk to kids, but apparently it makes you look more like a beekeeper if your stuff is dirty. So, but anyway, that's how to wash it. Now, the other thing is, what to do about your gloves. And here's the thing. Most beekeepers have, when you first started out, you might have gotten really heavy duty leather gloves like these. These don't even have a brand name on them. And we're going to talk about gloves more. There's lots of options here, but these are my stiffest, hardest gloves. Look at that. And you don't have much dexterity. This is for really heavy utility work. So these are more work gloves than beekeeper gloves, even though they're obviously designed for beekeepers. But what I'm going to do is there is a specific procedure for washing and reconditioning these leather gloves. And I thought, you know, just wash them and then put saddle soap on them the way you would any equestrian tack. But nope, there's a procedure for these gloves, and I'm going to do a video specific to that. And in that video, I'm going to talk about all types of beekeeping gloves. So you're going to want to look for that in the coming week. Although I will say, my most common beekeeping glove is these Curad surgical gloves. I have dispensers of these out by my bee shed, up in my studio, because I keep my hands clean. These things allow you maximum dexterity, but you know that when you're getting into your hive, you can get sticky stuff all over your hands. And then if you're like me, who's handling camera equipment and things like that, so I can bring you videos, I want to be able to just pull these off and then have clean hands to go on and do my work. So we're going to do a video dedicated just to glove reconditioning, and we're going to talk about the dexterity and the purpose behind a lot of different materials, from goat skin to deer skin to rawhide, and then of course the fabric gloves themselves, which, you know, I would much prefer nitrile gloves over most other gloves when it comes to getting into your beehive. But we're going to talk about it, and we're going to recondition them, and we're going to see how that goes. So that's taken care of right away. Next one is from George Garcia. And a thank you for those of you who take the time to post questions. It's very helpful, and usually we get most of the questions for this whole list within the first 2 days of a video like this one releasing. So it's very helpful, because if there's something I need to research or plan for, I have the rest of the week to do that. So he says, how long do weaver queen bees live? That's an interesting question, because a lot of people keep the queen in their hive for many years, and you run a high risk. So just as with the Guardian Bee apparel, rather than sit here and just say, oh, the queen bee, well, you get a couple years out of them, then you want to replace them. It was very interesting, because I shot an email off right away to the queen bee at Bee Weaver Apiaries, and that's Laura Weaver. And here's what she wrote. Dan, she said, replaces every 1 to 2 years with the exception of superb performers. And that's interesting too, because I hadn't thought about that. They use as their breeding stock, and if you don't already know, the weaver bees that I've been using for many years are survivor bees, varroa resistant, hygienic bees. So they're the ones that are constantly discarding bees, constantly biting off the varroa, grooming themselves down, and kicking everything out of the colony. in order to preserve the main core of the bees untreated. So I thought, since I've worked with them for so long and I've liked their bees and queens for so long, they said they breed their replacement queens for their genetic stock from those who are living more than 2 years. So I guess it wouldn't help if you had a queen that was awesome and she came right out of the gate, laying great and doing all the things, demonstrating the traits that you need in survivor hygienic bees. Then you might look early on and say, yeah, let's just, let's make more queens from that one right now. But according to Laura here, they don't breed from the early top performers. They wait until they're older, and then that's their stock. So that's really interesting. The other part was the biggest risk is not replacing in time. So in other words, a lot of people think, well, this is the time of year to introduce new queens. I generally think about replacing. I order from the Weaver family. I order my replacement queens in November the previous year to make sure they have what I want. Then I have them delivered generally the second week of May. And so I requeen every 2 years. And of course, unless I find a hive that's queenless or when I'm doing a split. So what she said here was actually very interesting because there are physical things to look for in the bee's performance. So when you're seeing the queen on the brood frame, and if she starts to drag her abdomen, or if her hind legs start dragging, or if she's looking tattered, a lot of obvious things that you would see also on foraging bees, the wings are frayed, and they just look kind of weathered. That's when it's time to replace the queen. But here's the thing. A lot of us go into fall with what we think is a really good queen, and then you get like midwinter, or some people are able, if you're in a warm area, obviously not where I live, because I can't get into my beehives at all in the wintertime. But for those of you who look in and find out, oh no, the queen's not laying. Maybe it's even October already or mid-November, and you get a warm day and you look into the hive and there's no brood. They would still have brood because what they're doing is they're hatching out your winter stock, which has to be the healthiest workforce that your queen's going to generate. So this is actually the most critical time of year. So the requeening time is actually at the end of the season, not the beginning. So you want to requeen, according to the Weaver family, you want to requeen every 2 years. Year and a half to 2 years, but you want to, better than that, you want to evaluate the queen that you have and see what her physical condition is, because if she dies in November or December, you're losing the colony. You're queenless. And when that happens, that means that those early warm-ups in February, see, January is generally your broodless time frame. Where I live, February, they're already putting in little patches of brood in there. So if you're queenless, you're already losing the early stock, and you're going to lose your colony, because in the spring you're going to have thousands of dead bees inside the colony and no replacements. And you know that because you're going to look at the brood and there isn't any. So that makes perfect sense. And I'm really glad, by the way, that George asked that question, because I hadn't thought, other than longevity, I mean, we know queens live for years. But the idea of replacing them in the fall, going into winter, that's the time, because when you put that new queen in there, you're going to know within a couple of weeks if she's laying eggs, if she's producing brood. And so now we're pretty well sure we've got a healthy young queen that's been mated, that's going to get those bees through winter. She's going to generate those winter bees, and that's going to be coming in strong in the spring. So for $30 or whatever it is for a queen, you're going to guarantee the success, or at least improve their chances profoundly by doing that. So that was very interesting. And I'm also going to put a link down in the video description for the Weaver family, so you can read about their bee stock and how they arrived at the stock that they have. So yeah, so the queen's alive, but she's rough looking. Don't forget what I said before. If you have to get rid of a queen, don't forget to take the old queen's body, put it in a small jar with isopropanol, crush it all up in there, and make your own queen pheromone lures out of her. So don't just throw her away. So that's really good stuff. So 2 years on average. If you want to take a risk and go farther than that, or you think that your queen is doing so well, the other thing is replace your own queens. So as you get into the fall or whatever, and you start seeing them building swarm cells, remove the queen. And let those swarm cells, let the queen cells hatch out. Hopefully you get a laying queen. And then of course, we had a Beekeeper Association meeting on Wednesday, and it was a breakfast, really awesome gathering, a lot of sharing of information. One of the things that I shared there that I thought is really valuable is make sure that you have insurance when you're splitting hives, order in replacement queens. If you don't need it when they get there, do a split, and then you got 3 days to have that hive queenless before you introduce the new queen, so they'll accept her. And spray her with Honeybee Healthy or something like that too, the whole colony, so that they have the same pheromone. It increases acceptance of queen bees. But that's interesting stuff, and many thanks to Mrs. Weaver there for sharing about that, because that's all new to me. What's the cheapest way to get honey from a beehive? Excellent question. Here's the thing. I get this question a lot because people are like, I don't want to buy a flow hive, they're so expensive. And I don't want to have an extractor, I only have 1 beehive or 2 beehives. So here's the thing. So I just thought, I went looking, as I often do, for new products online. And I don't even know how I was looking for an uncapping fork. I mean, I have the heated plane, and I have, the heated knife, and I have all these uncapping tools. And I thought, I'm just going to look around to see what's out there before I answer that question, because obviously the cheapest way is just to pull frames, scrape the honey out. And if you look on YouTube, there's something called crushing and straining of comb. So when I saw this thing, this is really interesting. I launched a video an hour ago, so you can see how this thing works. This is by far the best uncapping fork I have ever seen. It's a combination of a capping fork, uncapping fork, and a plane, because, normally with an uncapping fork, these tines go forward, and then you're scooping off like this, or you're using it as a fork to rake across the caps to open them up so you can put your frame in a spinner and extract the honey. Now, what if you don't have a spinner, and what if you just want to get that honey out of there, and you've got Pirco or acorn frames, and you just want to get the honey off, and you want to strain it. So instead of crushing and straining, how about uncapping and planing and then draining? See, like Dr. Seuss, uncapping, planing, draining the honey. So in my demonstration, and I hope you look at it, I'll probably put a link in the video description so you can find it easily if you haven't seen it already. I was just going to demonstrate how cleanly this shaves off the caps, and sometimes you get wavy frames of comb because it's longer and narrower, and it matches the frame next to it. You can use planes to level it out. That's one of the reasons I like planes, because you cut them off nice and even, and then you just put it back in the hive. One of the criticisms I get for having flow hives from viewers on YouTube around the world is that they look at that system and they go, oh, those bees forget how to make wax. Those bees don't have, there's no way to get honey and wax out of that. So when you have a flow frame, it's all plastic, and it ruins the bees because they forget everything. Okay, I'm not going to address a lot of those accusations about the flow hive, but when you have a deep box, the way I set up my flow hive, a deep box, then a medium or a second deep box, and then the flow super. So what's in the bottom box here, and this will tie into another question that we've got to answer later in the sequence, but the bees have their honey stores up here. And now here's the thing. A lot of my bees didn't use much of their honey stores this year. I've got boxes with 50 pounds or more of honey. So in that demonstration, what I did was I opened the winter reserves that they don't need anymore because they're bringing in new stuff. And I pulled some frames out of there, and then we're going to salvage honey out of that. So then so instead of just skimming the surface, I decided to take all the wax and everything off of that frame with this. And let me tell you what, this is the fastest, easiest thing I've ever used. I have nothing to do with this company. They didn't even give me this for free. I bought it on Amazon, and I put a link in that video that already launched this morning, and I guarantee you these things will be sold out by the time you're watching this. These will not be available. Why? Because they're cheap. It's 300 series stainless. It's made really well. This is one of those tools that's going to last you forever, and it is by far the easiest and cheapest way to remove wax and honey from a frame hopefully a one-piece food-grade plastic frame like Acorn, because they're going to hold up to everything. They're going to last. Scrape it all out of there and put it in a regular strainer and let that drain into what I showed in my video was a silicone cake pan that it goes into. And I got a quart of honey out of 2 medium frames without really being very careful. If you watch the video, it's kind of messy, and it was unplanned. I just like carved in there because I was just trying to test out what it can do. You can clean the frame completely in no time at all. So if you've got just 1 or 2 hives, the cheapest way to get honey from a beehive is to get one of these, use plastic frames, scrape it all out, wax and honey right into a standard kitchen strainer, stainless steel strainer, and then I put that inside a black 10-frame deep empty box that is used for the solar harvesting. So in other words, I put that in there, then I have this old window, basement window that I put on top of that. It's double pane. The sun only shined for like an hour yesterday, and then we had a lot of cloud cover. Well, it took us from 61 degrees on the outside to 84 degrees inside that box, and the honey drained out of it, and I should have brought my jar with me. Anyway, the honey drained out of it, so now we've got wax, and I was cutting away a lot of comb. Look at this. This is chunk honey. That stuff is awesome. That is leftover winter honey. So yes, you can get honey and wax from a flow hive, because the only frames that are plastic are the ones in the Flow Super itself. So if you only have 1 or 2 hives and you want to stay small scale and you don't want to spend all the money for a flow hive, brood box, and then super up from there, and then the following spring, if you want to make sure they have what they need through winter, they'll rise up into the second box or whatever, get what they need, and then you'll still have an upper box that's full of honey. You actually need to pull it off in the spring, because what's going to happen is they're not going to use their winter stores. This is how in feral colonies in trees, or when they get into houses or wherever they get, they spread out the honeycomb, and you'll find hundreds of pounds of honey in someone's walls or floor joists and things like that. Because what the bees do is, now the new honey flow is on, they go out and they forage and they bring it in, and they're filling up the cells that they use during winter, and they're no longer touching those distant cells full of capped honey. That's why you have to take it off, because you want to freshen that up. And this is your chance to harvest honey in the spring and not worry about impacting their ability to get through winter. It's a win-win. And if you use this uncapper, run it into a strainer, and then it goes through the strainer and right into a silicone, they're silicone cake trays that I use. Again, I'll put links to all this stuff so you can see what the kit is, or look at that video. I already listed everything in the kit. You're not going to be able to buy one of these. I guarantee you they're out of stock. But order it now for when they get back in stock, so that you can get one of these. If you're small scale and you just have a couple hives and you want to get honey out of it, that is the cheapest, easiest way ever. Another thing that comes up is, what if I had a die out? What if my bees died in the colony and there's all this honey in there? Can I just put that on another hive? Can I just put that on another colony? I highly recommend you do not take honeycombs from a die out and transfer those frames into another colony. First of all, that colony is going to do okay on its own. If they're brand new, if those are packaged bees, or if that's a nuke or something that you've just purchased, it's better that you put sugar syrup on there in a hive top, enclosed, to provide them with some resources. Don't pull frames from another one, because if there is nosema or something like that, you don't want to transfer that to those new bees. Now, what if you take off the honey and you uncap and you collect that wax and you chew that chunk honey and everything else? What if there was nosema in there? Is that going to hurt you? No, it isn't, because honeybees do not have any diseases that transfer to humans. So you're not at risk of getting anything from a die out. If that comb looks great, if it looks like this, that is awesome stuff. And I've got shims specifically so the bees will run free form comb in there. And that's what I'm going to cut out for chunk honey. And then later you pour I gave a bunch of these to my wife yesterday. And I said, don't forget to pour honey in here and have it all around the chunk honey. And she said, no, she didn't want to mess up the chunk honey the way it is. So she's just putting it in jars like this with nothing around it. And okay, well, if you want to do that, it doesn't look as cool. But if you want to do that, that's fine. But yeah, so you can harvest lots of stuff from your bees, even when you have a flow hive. And it doesn't have to cost you anything if you've got just, some frames and you've got leftover honey from winter and you want to take that off. If that stuff is in great shape, cut it out, use something like this. This is going to be great. It hadn't occurred to me. And I'm glad, by the way, for that question about the cheapest way to get honey from a beehive. It comes up all the time. And usually I'm like, if you're looking for the cheapest route for stuff, you probably don't care that much about the bees. But then I thought, yeah, they do. They're just small scale. Get that. That thing is easy. Next question, Bill Baskin. Deep with a medium top. If they travel up during winter, how do they go back down? Well, that's a good question. It's a common question I get. If you have seen videos that I've done years ago, I did testing with the flow hive. Sorry to keep bringing that up, but the principles are the same no matter what system you have. What I did with the flow hive was, normally, this is your standard brood box at the bottom. Then you put in between these two boxes a queen excluder if your next one up is your flow hive. So, and that's to keep the queen from laying in flow frames. And for you, that's to keep the queen from laying in your super. So you want nothing but honey. You don't want a bunch of brood in there. You don't want larvae in your honey extraction. So, but I don't use, as y'all may already know, I don't use queen excluders because I don't want to impede that progress. And especially when winter hits, when the cold weather hits, guess what happens? Your queen is down here in the brood. The entire cluster of bees is going to migrate up into your food resources during winter, and they're going to use those. And of course, the queen goes with them. If the queen were left behind, she could feasibly, and has, according to some people, they've found their queen caught in the queen excluder dead. So that's 100% beekeeper failure right there. When it comes to wintertime, you should not have a queen excluder anywhere in your hive because they need to move as a cluster around the queen and protect the queen. So then what happens is no queen excluder. They all migrate up into the honey super, which is where their winter resources are. And then what happens, again, remember we just talked about it, the queen will start to lay again in February. So where is she going to lay? She's going to lay up here where the cluster is, where the food and resources are. And when she does that, now what happens down here, we've got a bunch of empty comb. We've got the brood comb that now has no eggs or anything in it, and the queen's doing her thing up here. And she did lay eggs inside those plastic flow frames as well. So then everybody was upset about that. They were upset, first of all, that I allowed it, which I have to do, otherwise I wouldn't get answers to those questions. Can she do it? Yes, she can. And once she did, are those flow frames ruined? Nope. We have windows on flow hives, and we can see in there, and I can see all the capped brood, but guess what? As the weather warmed, as it is now, we are in April, the entire cluster returned down below on their own into those original brood frames. And then what happened to the frames that were occupied by brood? They hatched out. They cleaned out their own cocoons. They cleaned out those cells. Bees are very good at cleaning out cells and everything before they go on to put honey and resources in those cells. And they migrated on their own right back down to the bottom. Now, this year, I'm using something that's been around for a long time, but I just haven't used it. So here's your bottom board, and then it's customary to put a deep box, which is going to be your brood box, right on top of that. This year, now this particular one comes from Man Lake. This is called a slatted rack. This thing is going to go on top of the bottom board, and then your first deep brood box is going to sit on top of this. And notice that we have a solid piece across the front here. I'm going to put a link to this also, although these are hard to get. They're not selling these on Amazon. They only sell them. Man Lake sells them. And I'm putting them on some of my hives this year just to see how it works out. But what it does is creates this space between the bottom entry and then the beginning of the brood frames. So that supposedly will help the queen go all the way down to the bottom of her frames laying eggs. If you look at brood frames, that's called a slatted rack, if I didn't say that already. When you look at brood frames on the first deep box, you can see that they don't even draw the comb all the way down to the bottom of the frame, and the queen doesn't lay all the way to the bottom. And that's because at the entry board, there's lots of ventilation going on, because as things really kick in, we're going to pull that entrance reducer right off. So because of all that airflow and everything, the queen tends to start at the bottom third of that frame and then work up. So by rotating boxes, you can pull this top box, put it underneath this, and then you move this brood box up. But now you've got brood frame up above, and they're going to use that for honey storage. And these frames up here, we already know, are drawn full length, full depth. So by putting that on the bottom box, you're rotating them and you're forcing them, down here. But now you've got honey supers that are full of brood frames. Brood frames are not fantastic for honey. Bees store honey in them, but they're very fibrous. You're not going to get chunk honey out of that if you're into harvesting honey. And when you uncap it, you're going to see what I'm talking about, because the cells that have been used for brood are generally very fibrous and very resistant to you scraping or cutting into them. So my personal practice is to just let them stay as they are. I don't rotate bottom and upper boxes because they're going to go down on their own. And then when I'm looking at my honey super, if I see frames that are dingy looking, I interchange and replace those frames, the oldest ones with brand new ones, and I put them between two frames of drawn comb. I put a frame in the middle of that has no drawn comb on it, and then they draw that out. So I replace individual frames. I don't rotate whole boxes because they do this seasonal migration up and down on their own, so I don't need to swap that out. So I hope for Bill Baskin that I answered that question. They travel up during the winter, they go back down completely on their own, and you can also improve their desire to occupy that lower box even farther by putting in a slatted rack like the one I just showed you. It creates a space, and then that solid piece of wood that goes across there eliminates any drafting that would go straight up. And I'm going to put them on and leave them on right through winter this year. I wish I'd known about them last fall. I would have used them this winter as well. So they naturally do it on their own. There's no need to swap boxes for the purpose of getting the queen to have her brood down below. They naturally fill their honey cells at the top and work their way down, and she goes down to the lower area on her own, at least where I live and the way my bees do it. Swarm trap update. Empty frames. Should I be putting frames of honey in my swarm trap? This is something that I got to talk about a little bit at our Beekeeper Association meeting too, is that a lot of people feel like they want to fill the pantry. When you put out a swarm trap, this is prime season for swarm traps. So if you haven't put any out, put some out. You get freebies. And of course, I did a video about the Swarm Trooper. It's a lightweight box, and some of the people have already reported back to me since I did that video. They've caught swarms in their Swarm Troopers. They're very happy with them. No more hauling a wooden box up and sticking it in a tree or dealing with that weight. The Swarm Trooper, look at that video. It's turning out to be very successful. Obviously, it's not successful for me because look at the opening of this video sequence. We still have, I'm in the worst weather zone for some reason. I don't even know why. But what I don't want you to do is please don't take frames of capped honey and don't put any pollen packs in there thinking that, wow, you're stocking it up as a swarm trap. The scout bees are going to find that. They're going to think, yeah, let's move in. It's better that if you have old comb that's empty, put that in there because that's going to work. You're also going to want to put a swarm pheromone in there. You're going to put this like Swarm Commander. Some people use lemongrass oil. And that mimics scout bees scent marking that swarm trap to make other bees think that it's been found suitable by previous scouts and that they've marked it for themselves. And that's why sometimes you see competition at the swarm trap between colonies. They send their scouts out before they even swarm. So they're actively hunting a space to occupy. So that Swarm Trooper is turning out to be a fantastic thing. I'm going to put another link for that here. It's from the Blythewood Bee Company. They're also the company, by the way, that makes this Swarm Commander, even though this doesn't say Blythewood on it. Oh yeah, it does. Product of Blythewood Bee Company, but the website is swarmcommander.com. But yeah, so the same company that makes the Swarm Commander makes this. So obviously, I guess that's why they want you to use it. Couple spritz up in the back, little spritz at the entrance is all you need. Do not spray up the whole thing and create a strong pheromone, because now you're going to scare them away. So use old frame if you have it. Make sure it does not have anything that would be appealing to robber bees. If you've got pollen packs in there, scrape those little sections out. You do not want to encourage wax moths, small hive beetles. You don't want anything that's going to go in there and feed on that plant protein. So empty frames, they will have enough residual scent to them to make that even more appealing. Do you need those? What if you don't have them and you just put up a swarm trooper? You can just put regular frames in there. I recommend that you use acorn frames that have a heavy wax coating, because that's going to facilitate them drawing out comb right away and providing resources for the swarm right away. And also check those swarms frequently. It's going to be very easy to manage a swarm that's just newly gotten in there than it would be if they've been in there for a week or two, because now it's their residence. Now they're going to defend it, and you want to get that out and hive it. So anyway, so the updates are, and the best lure, the question was, I don't know what the best lure is. I know that this stuff works. So I would say the best lure is old frames, old deep frames from hives that you no longer use. That's what I use my old stuff that I'm getting rid of anyway, equipment that I'm discarding. If they're frames that are too old and too dark to be used in my current beehives, I use those for traps. So that's a good question. Next one, Dave Kirkaby. How common is it for a colony to go queenless, and how does it happen? Oh, well, I talked about that. What was my question? I don't know why I talked about the, did I talk about the queen bee? Yeah, how long do weaver queens live? So I guess I already answered that question. How common is it for it to go queenless? Very common. In fact, when we have our Beekeeper Association meetings and they do an assessment, who lost how many hives and what's the cause and effect of the loss, a lot of people simply say that the colony was queenless. So that takes us right back to question number 2 from George Garcia there. How long do weaver queen bees live? So the ability to look over the queen to make sure she's in premium condition going into the winter. And then you may consider, if you've got queens that are already 2 years old, then you want to swap them out to make sure you don't go queenless. So for me, I've had a couple colonies that go queenless. In fact, in the spring, because I order in those queens already in advance, when the queens arrive, I've done a YouTube video about it where you go, is a queen needed? And we look at each frame and we look for eggs and we look for brood and we look to make sure that there is no evidence that there's a queen present. Then we'll go ahead and install that replacement queen. You want them to have at least 3 days without the queen, and that way they're open and receptive to a new queen being installed. And then we're of course going to do that this year, and we're going to make videos, because it's one of the most frequently asked things I get here is, how do I start from scratch? Set up the hive, install bees, what's the progress? I'm going to do that. It's something I haven't done in the past because I felt that the ground has been so well covered, but people have been very persistent in wanting me to cover that in my YouTube series. So we're going to do it, and I'm going to do it in a new FlowHive 2 7-frame, 10-frame Langstroth size. It's already done, it's already put together, and it's standing by. And we're going to put that out there, and we're going to put bees in it. We're going to follow them through an entire season. So we're going to see how that goes. Number 7, from Brian. Once you remove flow supers for winter, how do they clean them? Or how do you clean them? Okay. Now this is good, also timely, because I have my flow super from 2015. I have just taken it out of service, and I am reconditioning all the wood. I'm pulling all the frames, and we are power washing them because I want to see what it holds up to and what the material condition is now that it's been in service for so long. So how do I clean them? I don't clean them. I take the frames out. If you look at some of my winter bee yard video sequences, the flow hive boxes are on, the frames have been pulled, and they use the flow hive boxes for feeders. Huge mistake. Do not use your flow hive super woodenware. That's with the removable back and the side panels and all of that. Don't pull the frames out and leave that wooden box on there and use that for a feeder shim. There's too much air going through it. It is not weather tight. It is really designed to be integrated with flow frames that have a barrier. All the frames bunch up together. They have a wind barrier, and they take care of that on their own. That super is not designed to be left out through winter. You can't use it for a feeder successfully. It's just not good for that. So remove the whole flow super with the flow frames after your last extraction. Get that off of there. Leave your brood box and at least a medium honey super on for winter. And then what I do is I set those flow frames out at a feeding station, and the bees clean out all the cells, and then it just goes to storage. And all I do is overlay them with heavy-duty black plastic trash bags to make sure nothing gets in there and tries to utilize any residue that's in that through winter. So, but I want to find out what the frames can hold up to, so I'm hitting them full bore with a pressure washer, and we're going to see what they can hold up to, because I feel like it's been in service long enough. I've replaced it, you know, so this year, this spring, I've pulled the original Flow Super out of service. I'm going to refinish the wood, and I'm going to see what those frames look like after we power wash them and get everything out. So that's coming up. We're going to look at that. But I don't clean them. I let the bees clean them. Now, if the bees did not, then I would just power wash them. But when you power wash them, you're going to wash away all the propolis work that they've done, all the wax work that they've done to seal things up. You're blasting all that out of there. And then so they're starting from scratch as if they were brand new flow frames, which are just plastic, food grade plastic. So I'm going to blast them, clean them up, and then we're going to get very close looks to see if there's any wear and tear on it. And then the frames might go back into service. So we're just going to evaluate that this year. Thank you for that question. Thank you for all of the questions. Now, after you've watched this, look at the video description down below to see links to the things I've described here. If you have questions of your own, please go ahead and post those down in the comment section. I really enjoy seeing that people share links to their stuff, and also the interaction between the people that are watching these videos, answering each other's questions, sharing information. That's really what we're all about, sharing information about bees and the things that you've done, and we're going to help beginners do better with beekeeping. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.